Howdy. Good evening. I'm Sam Kirkpatrick, the Executive Associate Dean of the Bush School of Government and Public Service. I welcome you tonight to our William and Dianne Moss Scowcroft Lecture Series, which brings high-profile practitioners and national leaders to our campus and to the Presidential Library Center. We appreciate the generosity of the Mosses and the organizing work of the Scowcroft Institute of International Affairs at the Bush School under the direction of Ambassador Larry Napper. Please, as usual, no photos tonight, and we would like you to turn your cell phones and pagers off. The Bush School offers courses in graduate study and national and homeland security affairs, plus a certificate in homeland security to practicing professionals around the globe. Tonight's a very special occasion for us as we host Secretary Janet Napolitano, who will present remarks and then respond to questions from the audience. To introduce her, I call upon the 24th President of Texas A&M University, Dr. Bowen Lofton, a physics graduate of the institution and a former faculty member at Old Dominion and the University of Houston, and formerly Chief Executive Officer of our Galveston campus. Please join me in welcoming President Lofton.
Howdy. Howdy. It's a great day in Aggieland. Janet Napolitano is the third Secretary of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. In this role, she leads our nation's collective efforts to secure ourselves from the threats we face, from terrorism to natural disasters. Prior to becoming Secretary, Ms. Napolitano was serving her second term as Governor of Arizona and was recognized as a national leader on Homeland Security, border security, and immigration. She was the first woman to chair the National Governors Association and was named one of the top 5 governors of the country by Time magazine. Secretary Napolitano was also the first female Attorney General of Arizona and served as U.S. Attorney for that district as well. Secretary Napolitano was born in New York City and grew up in Pittsburgh and Albuquerque. She graduated from Santa Clara University and received her J.D. from the University of Virginia School of Law. Before entering public office, Ms. Napolitano served as clerk for a member of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit and practiced law in Phoenix at the firm of Lewis & Rocha. Please help me in welcoming the Honorable Janet Napolitano.
Thank you. Howdy. Howdy. Good, I got it right. Thank you, President Lofton, for the introduction. Thank you as well to the Bush School of Public Service here at Texas A&M for inviting me to be with you today. I really am looking forward to the question and answer portion of the program, so get ready. But let me begin, if I might, because since the beginning of the year, I've been speaking at colleges and universities across the country discussing some of the major issues relating to Homeland Security. I spoke on border security at the University of Texas at El Paso. I spoke recently at some other institutions. And the idea, of course, is to connect Homeland Security with what is going on in our colleges, in our universities today. Why? Because I believe you are the security professionals of the future, and we need to make that tie right now. I know there is a strong reputation here for public service. I just came out of a grilling across the way, so I know there's a lot of learning going on and study and thinking, and I applaud that. It's important. It's important for our country that that be happening, so I appreciate what this school is doing. And I should say that I'm deeply grateful for the reception I've had here at the Bush School and at Texas A&M, no matter what athletic conference the Aggies ultimately find themselves in. A little over a week ago, I was in New York City for the commemoration of the 10th anniversary of the attacks of 9/11. It was, as you might imagine, a very powerful time. I had dinner the Friday night of that weekend at a firehouse in Brooklyn.
that had lost 6 firefighters in the attacks. I sat next to an elderly woman who had lost not only a son who was a firefighter, but her other son who was a police officer. She lost both her sons that day. And I think it's important to start there because that was and gave rise to the birth of the department I'm privileged to lead, the Department of Homeland Security. And a question I'm often asked now is, well, are we safer now than we were then? And I think the answer is we are safer. But we live in a world of ever-evolving threats and risks, and we have to know that that is part of our environment. And we must act to maximize our ability to prevent harm from occurring and also maximize our ability to respond quickly and effectively. That means terrorism prevention. That means response. That means resilience, the resilience of our country and of our communities. So I think that if you think back over the past 10 years, it's fair to say that our experience collectively has made us smarter about the kinds of threats we face and how best to deal with them. We've used this knowledge to make our nation and our communities more resilient, not just to terrorist attacks, but to threats and disasters of all kinds. And we've done that within the framework as well of safeguarding the fundamental rights that we Americans cherish, our civil liberties, our privacy. Even as we have made progress, and even though I can say we're safer now than we were 10 years ago, there should be no doubt that serious threats from terrorism remain. Terrorism did not begin on 9/11. It did not end with the death of Osama bin Laden. Today's terrorist threats are real. They are rapidly evolving. They demand constant vigilance, and they demand our willingness to learn and to adapt. In addition to the direct threats we face from al-Qaeda, we face growing threats from other foreign-based terrorist groups that are inspired by al-Qaeda or al-Qaeda-like ideology. We also face a threat environment where violent extremism is neither constrained by international borders nor, in fact, limited to a single ideology. In fact, one of the more striking elements of today's threat picture is that plots to attack the United States have increasingly involved American residents and citizens. In other words, the plots have come not just from without, they have come from within. And the fact that the new kinds of threats we face can come at us from any direction with little or no warning changes much of our thinking about terrorism prevention. Now, of course, we need a strong military. We need top-notch intelligence to fight terrorism abroad. And I think a great example of that, of course, was the operation to kill bin Laden. But one of the biggest implications of today's evolving threat picture is that more and more our state, our local, our tribal law enforcement officers and their community partners will often be in the best position to uncover the first sign of terrorist activity. So since becoming secretary in January of '09, one of the priorities I've set for us is to get information and tools and resources and data and analysis outside of Washington, D.C. And into the hands of those on the front lines of keeping their communities safe. Now, let's begin with the first premise. Here's the first premise. No federal agency, no matter how well run, no federal agency can by itself secure the nation. No federal agencies together, plural, can collectively secure the nation. It requires a number of partners working together to maximize our preventive abilities. And that's why the notion of shared responsibility, security as a shared responsibility, is so fundamental. And that means that when we talk about homeland security, we often have to begin with hometown security. What are the capacities there? What are the resources there? How is information shared? How is information received? How is training done? Who is trained? Who has the money? Who doesn't have money? What kind of resources are there? Do your communication systems work or don't they? Do you know how to respond to a biological attack or don't you? Are you in a community that has mass transit or not? Are you in a community where there's critical physical infrastructure around, a major dam, a nuclear power reactor? Or are you in a community that has resources of another type? Homeland security begins with hometown security, and hometown security is incredibly varied. So we have to reach from the department across not only the federal government, but to law enforcement and communities of all kinds across our country to really maximize our ability. And, by the way, we can't stop just with collaborating with local governments. We need to make sure that we are collaborating with the private sector and with local community organizations, the faith-based community, nonprofit organizations, academic institutions. All have different roles to play. So we have built within some of these thoughts what we call the Homeland Security Enterprise. We understand, for example, the importance of collecting and analyzing information at the local level, and then sharing information on a real-time basis. That is an easy thing to say. It is a very, very difficult thing to do. The intelligence community in Washington, D.C. is not organized to share information at an unclassified level or even a secret level across states and jurisdictions. So we have had to work and do some culture changing there to maximize our information and analytics sharing capacity across the country. But now I can stand before you and say we have 72 fusion centers across the United States. What are they? They're exactly what their name implies. They are centers where you have federal, state, local entities. You typically have some critical private sector partners in there, like utility companies. You may also have some other partners in there as well. All but a few are connected to a network that allows them to receive classified information, at least classified to the secret level. And not only that, most of them also have analysts that we have trained and sent out to the rest of the country to help train others in local communities about analysis. It's not just about data. It's about analysis and how to properly use the data. And so those 72 fusion centers throughout the country, including 3 here in Texas, help form part of that Homeland Security enterprise. Another thing is sharing information is making sure that what we do makes sense. And that means we got to change some other things. You may have noticed this past spring that we eliminated the old color code system. We said goodbye to orange. And why did we say goodbye to orange? Well, we said goodbye to orange because it didn't mean anything anymore. We had been in our airports at orange since 2006. And so we replaced it with a system called the National Terrorism Advisory System, where we can, assuming a normal elevated level of risk that I think will always be with us, but we can raise that based on data and intelligence to if something is specific and credible, and particularly if it's imminent. And we've set up a process by which that is done. And then if we do raise a level, we can provide information about what the threat is And not only that, but what you need to do to protect yourself, your family, your workplace, and then how you can receive constantly updated and accurate information. As we build out Homeland Security, as we build out this concept of shared responsibility, as we build out this notion that it begins with the hometowns, we also begin looking at, well, what can we do to empower individual citizens? And so we took a campaign started by the Metropolitan Transit Authority in New York, and we've begun spreading it across the country. We announced it in Houston earlier today, and working very closely with some of our other partners like DOJ. But it's a very simple slogan. If you see something, say something. If you see something that doesn't ring true, if you are a street vendor in New York and you see a truck you haven't seen parked on the street where you normally are and there's smoke coming out of it, get in touch with law enforcement. Well, that's how we caught Faisal Shahzad, the Times Square bomber, before that bomb went off, before that bomb went off and would have killed a lot of people. If you're a city worker in Spokane, Washington, and you're getting the parade route ready for the MLK Day parade and you see an unattended package on a bench, you have the police take a look at it, and all of a sudden they find an IED that was set to go off remotely during the parade. Those are just two examples I could give you, but I can give you example after example where a vigilant citizenry, being vigilant, not living in fear, but being vigilant, has made a real difference in the shared responsibility of security. And then at the same time, how do we get information from law enforcement back so that when things are reported in, we can collect them across the country so that we can analyze for tactics and trends and behaviors that are beginning to appear. And so now we have trained in the past, I'd say 6 months or so, almost 100,000 police officers across the United States on something called SARS, that's Suspicious Activity Reporting. It's not Orwellian, it's very carefully done. There's a strict protocol associated with it. That's why you have to have good training. But it is meant to be a way by which across this very varied country of ours, we can collect information and analyze it and put it into a product that looks for the kinds of patterns that we can then share back across the country as a whole. And that as well has turned into be a very, very new but also useful way of looking at Homeland Security. Now, the question I think for all of us at this point is how do we keep growing and maturing? You know, when Congress created the department 8 years ago, it combined 22 agencies under one roof. It was the largest reorganization of the federal government since the Department of Defense was created. And the question is, well, how do you unite 22 agencies, all of whom had different legacies, different histories? Some came from Treasury, some came from Justice, some came from Commerce, some came from Transportation, some had no mothership at all. And how do you put them into a cabinet-level department that is coordinated and responsive to the Homeland Security needs of the country? And one of the ways we do it is, in addition to the things I've suggested, but is also making the Homeland more resilient and doing that one community at a time. And when I say resilient, what I mean is that every community, it can be a university or a college campus, it can be a town, a city, an Indian reservation, it doesn't matter what the community is, but that it is enabled and empowered to respond and react quickly and come back quickly, bounce back quickly, should there be an incident or crisis, whatever the source, a terrorist attack, another man-caused disaster, Mother Nature. And that means training, it means integrating functions and responsibilities, and it means bringing together in a new way in our department people who are ready to think outside the box, to use a hackneyed phrase, but to think in new and novel ways about how we improve the resilience of the country. Let me give you an example of 5 things that we've had to deal with over the last 10 days of the Department of Homeland Security to drive home the point I'm making, particularly the young people in this audience, about why Homeland Security is a new area, but also one that has incredible variety to it. We have had to deal with earthquakes, hurricanes, and floods. Public awareness and an active threat stream surrounding the 9/11 anniversary, shutting down several major human trafficking rings, an effort to secure the global supply chain, and we have executed new cybersecurity agreements with some of our international partners. And that's just some of what happened over the last 10 days. So as we bring this department together, unite 22 agencies, create a sense of one Department of Homeland Security, and then across the country, a Homeland Security enterprise, you can see that this is designed to make sure that we are doing all we can, everything we can think of, to improve the safety of our country. So we are constantly asking ourselves questions. And some of these questions don't have easy answers. If they did, I wouldn't be asking them. Maybe some of you have the answers. How do we keep travel and trade flowing across our borders while maintaining security standards? You know, our borders with Canada and Mexico, that's our #1 and 2 trading partners. The effective operation of borders is responsible for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of jobs. Trade has to go through fast. You've got to be able to check semis that may be carrying who knows what to get into the markets of the United States, and at the same time making sure they don't carry contraband, drugs, human beings, or perhaps even a potential terrorist. How do we secure our nation's critical infrastructure when 85% of it is in private hands? What do I mean by critical infrastructure? Our communication systems, our banking system, much of our transportation systems, all are in private hands. How do we make sure that they are incorporating core concepts of security and resilience even as they are facing diminishing markets, a recession, or what have you? How do we address the risk of potentially catastrophic events such as a major earthquake or attack when we don't know where or when it could happen or what exactly it could look like? How do you deal with uncertainty in the risk environment? And then finally, how do we do our job of providing security without sacrificing civil rights and liberties? In other words, how do we make sure that we get that balance right? And sometimes that balance is not always easy to see. So these are some of the challenges that we face at the national level, and also we face at the international level. We play a role, be it from, assisting Texas during periods of wildfires to dealing with any other kind of flooding or natural disaster, as I mentioned, that's occurred this spring. So we've got the individual, the local, the national, the international. And the work of mitigating those risks, maximizing our capacities, all has to be done simultaneously. And all has to be done at a time when government resources, I don't know if you've noticed or not, but government resources are not growing. They are going the other way. So what does the future hold in store for this enterprise, for our efforts individually and collectively? First of all, we need to have integrated thinking across a broad variety of disciplines. That's a must. Science, law, management, law enforcement, international relations, cybersecurity, they all have to be looked at. Our great academic institutions like Texas A&M need to help us succeed in these endeavors and need to help us get the kind of students who are trained properly to help us think our way through these things. And then we push forward aggressively and as urgently and with as much speed as we can on all kinds of fronts. Now, we can look to history for a model of how this has happened before. But if you look back to the first years of the Cold War, Americans then showed tremendous foresight and poise in building the kind of architecture to rebuild and to stabilize. They enlisted the expertise of our people. They worked with our best academic institutions, and they made sure that we protected our values. Let's go back to the spring of 1945. American policymakers were instrumental in creating the UN and the UN Security Council, the Bretton Woods system, the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, and of course during the war, the Department of Defense, the CIA, and NATO. Now, they were creating new institutions then. They were dealing with a new kind of world. We don't need more new institutions. What we need, however, is the kind of appreciation of urgency and complexity that drove those kinds of decisions and that drove the decision makers at that time. And that's why programs like the Homeland Security Program here at the Bush School, helping us with new thinking, education, programs like this emerging at other institutions across the country are so very, very important. Because for the young people and the professionals here tonight, you will be the next wave of Homeland Security professionals. Let me close with this, because you know, I'll just be personal here for a moment. Look, you know, I was very happy as the governor of Arizona. I mean, Arizona's a really nice place to live. You know, Arizona's one of the few states that doesn't have a governor's mansion, so I had the only gubernatorial condominium in the country. But you know, it was really nice, and there were things that I wanted to finish at the end of my second term. And when the president-elect called shortly after the election to ask if I would take on this task, I knew that I knew that this was a task that needed doing. That it is so important for the country of this century to be able to be properly prepared for the new and evolving threats that we face, and to be able to do it in a way that uses our best minds, that incorporates our best science, our best technology, that reaches out to our international partners, but our state and local partners as well, and that appreciates the role of each individual. It was a hard choice. But I believe when the president calls and asks you to do something, your answer should be yes. And so I will say to the young people here in this audience that when the Secretary of Homeland Security calls, I hope she gets a similar response. Thank you very much. All right, we have microphones in both aisles. If anyone has a question, all right, now come on. Someone will be first. Here we go.
You spoke about maximizing infrastructure and capabilities on a local level. We know in these times of fiscal austerity that federal funding has decreased for Homeland Security programs and likely will continue to decrease. To what extent do you believe that state and local programs will be able to fill in the gaps?
Well, I think for the most part they won't be able to in a dollar-for-dollar sense, right? So I think what we have to do is look at the monies we do have And I'm hopeful that that the cuts in the grants area in particular will be kept to a minimum. But we need to look at what those grants are, what we need to do to consolidate perhaps grant programs so we create greater flexibility in them, and then work with the grantees to see what dollars they have available that they can use. So consolidation, elimination of redundancy, trying to remove as much overhead as possible, trying to put into the grant programs as much flexibility as possible. I'll give you an example of that. Federal grant programs in the past have not allowed grantees to use the money for maintenance and repair. So everybody in the first years of the Department of Homeland Security was buying all kinds of new stuff. New fire trucks, helicopters, and all this sort of thing. Well, now they need to be repaired, and they need to be maintained. And localities, some of them didn't have the money to do that, but they could apply to buy something new. Well, it made no sense. We went back to the Congress and said we need to be able to rewrite grant guidance to be able to incorporate some of those expenses as opposed to continually buying new things. Yes.
All right, thank you, Madam Secretary. I judge high school debate, and some of those kids are pretty bright. And I was judging around last weekend, and they were saying that as regards to the TSA is concerned, up to during sometimes 70% of contraband items are getting let through, and sometimes we're seeing ports that aren't seeing things that are being scanned for radiological and biological harms. So, what is the Department of Homeland Security doing to try and improve the things that are getting through and make ourselves a more safe country?
I think the most important concept that we have deployed is the concept of layering. That if all you have to do is get through one thing, your chances are greater than if you have to get through 5 or 6 different layers that give us the opportunity to fill in where a gap may exist. And so, for example, in the airport environment, before you even get to the airport, there are things that are happening in connection with your purchase of a ticket. When you get to the airport itself, you'll see K-9 teams. You'll see those. What you won't see are undercover behavioral detection officers who are trained on some specific programs we're now using more and more of. There also will be greater and is greater use of explosive trace detection equipment and explosive wave detection equipment, so that is increased. And that's before you even get to the gate. You get to the gate, there are a number of ways that we now are using to verify identity. And also, of course, we keep improving the technology that's actually used in terms of what can get through. And then even if you get contraband onto the plane, the chances that you can weaponize the plane, as the 9/11 attackers did, virtually nil. Why? Because of a simple change we made, which is to require commercial airliners to harden the cockpit door. You can't get into the cockpit, so you can't weaponize a plane. So I would suggest that the way to look at the problem overall is to see how the layers are actually working. And we are constantly testing ourselves and seeing what we can get through the system. And I think that's an important concept as well, that we're never sitting back. The airport and transportation environments are too important, and we know aviation remains a target. Yes?
Thank you. I have a quote from you from when you were in El Paso. You said something in regards to it's inaccurate to state, as many have had, that the border is overrun with violence and it's out of control. You referred to that as scoring political points, and you said that the statistics prove it otherwise. My question is that the statistics go off of the FBI's Uniform Crime Act. With it measuring things such as spillover violence, does it take into account as things such as kidnappings and murders that are going on when people kidnap in the U.S. and take over to Mexico? Is there a better system that we could use to show the accuracy in those numbers?
Yeah, actually, we weren't referring only to the FBI numbers. Because we were also talking and have been talking regularly with the sheriffs and police chiefs along the border as to what they're actually seeing. For example, how many stash houses are you finding? How many people are in the stash houses? Specific inquiries about kidnappings and the like. But the factual record is the factual record, confirmed a variety of different ways now, that we have put more manpower and technology and infrastructure at the southwest border than at any time in our nation's history, and more is actually on its way. And that combined with the economy in the United States, and that has its own impact, has really reduced the incidence of crime along the border, so that the border cities like El Paso do remain some of the safest in the United States. But we're not just relying on those FBI stats. We know it's a much more complicated picture.
Joe Dixon, Emeritus Professor in Agriculture at Texas A&M. We have an active research program collaborative with scientists in Mexico and Texas, and we are presently putting together a book on several years' research. And it occurs to me that there might be some way that we could utilize this connection in sharing information and in improving our correspondence. We have found, for example, in one case where we needed to ship some animal parts to Mexico to get analyses, that they wouldn't even let them go in. But in general, we would like to be able to use our collaborative science to link with collaborative safety and security.
Right. I think that's a really good point, and would like to follow up on that a little bit. There are 2 points there. One is the aspect of using collaborative science, but the other is the actual shipment of material back and forth across the border, and how do you facilitate that, particularly when you're trying to do testing on a real-time basis and you need to move samples and the like. We saw some of this during the H1N1 outbreak a few years ago, and we're trying to get some of that was maybe not as fast as we needed it to be. What I would suggest, that I think there are some avenues there. There are avenues with our science and technology folks. There are avenues with we have a whole division within Customs that does the agricultural and animal science problems associated with trans-border transportation. Perhaps we could get some contact information, and we will follow up with you, or have someone appropriate follow up with you.
Thank you.
Good. Yes, sir.
Madam Secretary, I'd like to ask you to get a little closer to one of the third rails of politics, immigration. I know that this is a legislative issue, but not an executive one. But from your vast experience in Arizona and Washington, are there some principles, are there some precepts, are there some assumptions that you would want to say should guide any revision of our immigration policy?
Yeah, yes. I've been dealing with the border and immigration for a long time, as your question recognizes, and I mean, I prosecuted 6,000 plus immigration-related felonies, so I mean, I think I know a little bit about this area. To me, a couple of things. One is that we need to do all we can to prevent illegal entry into the United States. That means not just at the border, but also those who overstay their visas, because that's about half of the 60% of the problem are people who entered legally, but then have just stayed. we have now, over the last 6 months, been able to dramatically cut down and cut back on that problem. One of the things we did is we took the estimate of visa overstays, and because we have much more robust data systems that we're using now, and we have them much better connected with each other, they're talking to each other, we were able to find out that half of those individuals had actually left, right? So, and then we've been able to go through and identify those remaining, but also run them in ways so that we can prioritize who we need to seek out and remove first. So we run them against our national security databases, our crime databases, our databases of those who have outstanding warrants for their arrest or appearance. And that gives you 3 examples of the priorities we've set, and then send our, so we really are going after that visa overstay issue. So I think having a strong law enforcement presence so people have confidence in the rule of law is important. But then we have to, I think, dramatically alter our visa system from a variety of standpoints, from being somebody who's coming here to work, to be a tourist and spend monies that way, what have you. That needs a lot of work. We need, I think, to deal realistically with those in the country illegally who we don't have the resources to remove. I think we need to pass the DREAM Act for kids who were brought here through no fault of their own. I mean, they're not culpable in any sense of the word. They grew up here. We're in this terrible position of, do you send them to a country they've never been to? So there needs to be a way to deal with that. So strong, good, effective enforcement of the law, both at the borders and with visa overstays. Visa reform itself, and then dealing realistically with those already in the country, particularly some of the subsets like the DREAM Act students. I think that forms really a good outline for what a bill should look like.
Madam Secretary, can you go into a little bit more depth about something that you mentioned earlier, which was, and I'm curious what the Department of Homeland Security and how much of y'all's time is spent working to combat human trafficking here within the states?
Yeah, we actually, we have a couple things on human trafficking. We started or participated very actively in something called the Blue Campaign, and that brings together all kinds of elements of the department. Part of it is law enforcement, part of it is visa related, so that, for example, victims of human trafficking who report it are not then deported themselves, kind of a catch-22, and then greater public law enforcement awareness and public awareness about human trafficking. On the latter score, we have a series of PSAs that Ashton Kutcher and Demi Moore are in, this was before he became the 2.5 man or whatever. But he's a great guy anyway. But PSAs that they have contributed pro bono, and also some new media outreach as well. We're also participating or dealing more in the international arena on the human trafficking front. For example, the major international sources of trafficking, some are in Southeast Asia, some in the former republics of the Soviet Union, some from Central America and Mexico, and so really working to identify the traffickers themselves and doing what we can to interrupt that. It is an insidious, terrible business in the world, and it involves terrible the child sex trafficking, but also forced labor trafficking. Texas is actually one of the few states in the country, I believe, that actually has a human trafficking state law. And I don't know what's being done at the state level here on that score, but it is a pernicious, terrible problem.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Keep going on that.
There you go.
Madam Secretary, thank you for coming to speak to the institution. I'm a West Texan, and you as a person that served in Arizona realize how important trade and diplomatic relations with Mexico are. But a less reliable ally as Pakistan, we went in to go get Osama bin Laden. Could we, or has there already been talks about using that same kind of technology and intelligence to go in and go after some of those drug lords to cut that snake off at the head too?
Well, as tempting as that may be, seriously, let's be very serious here. Look, there are very important issues here. Mexico is our friend, it's our ally. It's the number 1 or 2 trading partner of 22 or 23 states. They have a very active, as you know, aggressive federal action moving against the cartels. It simply is not comparable in terms of instituting a unilateral action into Mexico. What is needed and what is going on is work with Mexico. We've been supplying some resources through the Merida Initiative, a lot of training. We have forged agreements on intel collection and analysis that we simply didn't have 4 or 5 years ago. And I think those need to be given some time to work. As I think people can appreciate, intel analysis and of collection analysis, it doesn't happen in a 60-minute television show. It takes time to develop sources. It takes time to learn how to work with those sources. Mexico has put huge effort into this. We are supporting those efforts every way that we can. Good.
Howdy. I'd like to thank you for
Howdy back.
I'd like to thank you for speaking here with us at Texas A&M. And I was wondering, with so many of our own population suffering from unemployment and insufficient means and not able to afford their own higher education, is this really the proper economic climate to be going to be trying to pass something such as the DREAM Act when our own citizens can't afford these same benefits and ways to further themselves?
Yeah, I don't think the DREAM Act has much to do in that regard. These are the DREAM Act. Students who would qualify are basically young people who were brought here at a very early age, and they've been going to school in the United States. And they can either complete their educations and become economic producers in their own right, or we have to spend resources to deport them to a country they've never been in to begin with. So that's the way I look at that particular issue. But I think your question it really goes to a deeper issue in a way, which is this the right economic time to take up immigration at all? And it seems like there never seems to be a right time. It's always, next year. And the plain fact of the matter is, from a law enforcement perspective, from an economic perspective, from a security perspective, from every other perspective one can think of, this is a law that needs to be updated. It does not match what the needs of the country are. And so, if we believe, as I do, that immigration is based on the rule of law, laws need to change to match changed circumstances. And we have changed circumstances now. And that's what we're talking about.
Madam Secretary, I have a question in regards to the homegrown terrorism in America. My question is, what initiatives have been taken by Homeland Security to educate, as you know, majority of the terrorism that's coming from Arab, South Asian, or Islamic communities, and they're heading to overseas, Somalia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, to provide them those tools and education so they can able to stop them before they head overseas and brainwash them, because I went from East Coast to West Coast, sees many communities, many kids come from the dysfunctional families, and they're left in those communities and don't have really help, and leadership aspect not really strong in some of the communities, and so they just left on the sake whoever the community bad guys. So what initiative have been taken by Homeland Security to partners for those communities?
We've done a fair amount of outreach in the communities through, we actually have a unit, it's called Civil Rights, Civil Liberties, but they have really focused on outreach into the Muslim American community, the Somali community in particular, and also educating law enforcement around the country about what are some of the things that they need to watch out for from a neighborhood policing standpoint as well. You're right that prevention is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, whatever that old adage is. If we can work with communities to prevent that radicalization from occurring, that violent extremism from occurring, that is worth a lot. So we're doing a lot of outreach. The Department of Justice is doing a terrific amount of outreach as well. It's just hard. I mean, it's hard to know, what a young person who's growing up in pretty comfortable circumstances in the United States, what turns on the switch that causes them to travel and live in the Fatah or live in a camp in Somalia or someplace for 6 months and then return with the intent of committing acts of violence against people in the homeland. And we don't understand that psychology, sociology well enough yet. So we have to work on having bridges with the communities themselves and good, effective law enforcement that can see early warning signals.
Yes, yesterday we were told by local lawmakers that southbound inspections could not be performed at all ports of entry. And what plans are in place or what's in the work to detect bulk cash or weapons going southbound?
Yeah, we do. We do southbound inspections of 100% of rail going south. And then we don't do every lane going south. We don't have the manpower with which to do that. But we do have the manpower to alternate lanes and to do a pretty aggressive, unpredictable pattern of southbound traffic, searching for bulk cash and guns and going there. One of the ways that we detect it is with dogs. You can train a dog to sniff anything. And I'm serious. And you all are laughing, but it is a fact that you can actually train dogs to sniff bulk cash. So that's one of the mechanisms we're using. Okay. Good.
Thank you.
Madam Secretary, my name is Patrick East. I'm an MPI student at the Bush School, and I've just completed a project regarding drugs coming in to the United States. And I've found that this realization is in fact a matter of national security, although you may not realize it in the sense that in the past 10 years, we've thought of national security as, a terrorist attack or a bomb going off. So what is the stance of the Department of Homeland Security on this threat of national security, which is drugs coming in primarily from Mexico and also from Canada?
Well, we've actually, obviously we're against drug trafficking. So. If the answer to the question, that's our position. Right. But what are we doing about it is really the question. And, because we have more manpower and technology and infrastructure at the borders now, we're picking up a lot more of particularly the drugs that are coming in from Central America and Mexico. Because we have the Coast Guard, we know that we're having some impact on the land routes. Why? Because we're picking more of it coming in from the oceans, and our seizures are up significantly over last year, and the last year they were up significantly over the year before. So I think we're doing, from an border interdiction standpoint, I think that our trend lines are all in the right direction. What needs to go up is going up. What needs to go down is going down. One of the more intractable question is how do you reduce demand? Because it is that demand that creates that financial incentive that fuels those cartels and fuels that trafficking. And that is probably a discussion for another session, but it should be something that is of concern to all of us, that the issue of drug demand, it does implicate families, it does implicate communities, and as I said at the beginning of my talk, if I believe Homeland Security begins with hometown security, part of that involves, well, what's going on in our hometowns to begin with, right?
Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Secretary. To what degree do civil liberties and civil liberties unions and advocate groups hinder Homeland Security and the Homeland Security enterprise from achieving an effective degree of, pardon the word, invasiveness to combat homegrown terrorism?
Oh, I would put it, look, I think that the values that we are fighting to protect are embodied in the foundational documents of our country. And that involves the protection of basic freedoms. And so the question or the challenge is, how do you do that? And at the same time, make sure that you're doing what you can to protect public safety. So, for example, how do you manage an airport checkpoint in the right way to protect civil liberties and people's expectations of privacy? How do you provide for cyber security when the internet is and what the contents of what's on the internet is protected by the First Amendment? These are simply hard challenges that we have. There are no easy answers, but I don't think we should view one to be sacrificed to the other. I think what we need to figure out, and what's hard, and it's a very hard problem, is how you let these things coexist, and that's really the way we look at that problem.
Please join me in thanking the Secretary for joining us.
Thank you all very much.
We'll just remain seated for just a few minutes until the Secretary and her party leave. And we'll be out of here in short order. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.